Yeah, so hi everyone. I am Deyasini Roy, and I welcome you all to the stories of cultural identity and ideology, food and drinks, and the TMYS Review September 2022 project in association with York Center for Asian Research, York University, Canada. We are seeking submissions in the form of essays, stories, and poems to know more about the architecture of our presently ongoing projects. Please visit our website www.tellmeyourstory.biz. Well, I would like to begin today's session by saying that the human relationship with food is truly a unique one. Food not only imparts nutrients to one's body, but also forges an emotional connection so much that it solidifies your connection with people you love. It becomes a memory, nudges your inner depths, gives you the joy of your first homecoming, and is so much more than an evolutionary trick of survival. So, today we will be taking on a different dimension of food, that is, food post death, and understand the nuances of its diverse cultural aspects and how it becomes an important association with the memories of the dead and those that are living. So, the topic of our digital conversation today is Death, Dirge, and Delicacies, Forbidden Food Post Death. And we are extremely privileged to have amongst us Miss Ribeiro, Miss Sabita Radhakrishnan, and Miss Vernika Awal this evening. So before we move on to hear and engage with our speakers, I would like to quickly introduce them. An alumnus of the Indian Institute of Mass Communication, New Delhi, Miss Ribeiro is an independent writer and food critic. Currently, she is a state president of the WICCI Rural Tourism Council Goa. She writes in food and beverage for publications across India, apart from having her own YouTube channel, Mini's Food Fundas, passionate about cooking and baking. She held the first pop up Mini's repertoire of Goan Sunday specials at the Hyatt Regency Mumbai in February 2020. She authored her first cookbook, Magical Twists East Meets West. She's also an actor and a gold medalist in Kathak from Allahabad University. We welcome you, ma'am, and a very good evening to you.
Thank you, dear. Good evening to all of you.
So, we also have Miss Sabita Radhakrishnan joining us today. She's a columnist, journalist, playwright, textile revivalist, and award winning cookbook writer, and has published 5 cookbooks. Her recent novel, Looms of Arivor, focuses on the travels of the handloom weaver. She translated an autobiography of an actor, Shivaji Ganesh, from Tamil to English. Currently, she is the chairperson and founder of an NGO, Udhavi, which helps elders in the city to lead a meaningful life. We welcome you, ma'am, and a very good evening to you.
Good evening.
Yeah. We also have Miss Awal joining us today. She is a food writer and journalist, known for her research based articles that feature in various national dailies and her blog, Delectable Reveries. 4 years back, she began working on the concept of Delectable Punjab, through which she aimed to document the culture and cuisine from her home state of Punjab. She is also a weekly column in New Indian Express, by the name of Delectable Delhi, which discovers Delhi from the lens of food and culture. We welcome you, ma'am, to today's discussion. And
Thank you so much.
yeah, and without further ado, I would now like to invite Miss Ribeiro to share her insights on the topic. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Deyasini. Good evening, everyone, once again. Indeed, a pleasure and a privilege to be part of this panel with such esteemed panelists, and of course, an extremely interesting topic, which obviously piqued my interest. And fortunately, I have sort of researched a bit on this and written about this in the past. And basically, what is very interesting is that when we talk about food, as we were sort of speaking even before the discussion started, that we generally don't tend to sort of, tread on this area of a food discussion about food during the morning period. Interesting thing is that the history of food and mourning, obviously, it sort of dates back to very, very long ago. And in fact, it actually started with the consumption of the deceased. Actually, cannibalism, as it was called. And it was only much later that it sort of this tradition evolved. And next, it actually focused on providing food to the departed soul. And finally, as we know it today, mourning food or food for the people who are still living, but mourning for somebody who has passed away actually came about only in the Middle Ages. What is very interesting is that food during mourning actually assumes sort of different proportions in terms of the fact that the moment somebody loses a loved one in the family, obviously you're sort of mourning, you're depressed, you're sad. It's a pall of gloom descends upon your life and your very being, and it actually permeates to all sections of your life. And obviously, food is no different. Apart from that, there's an interesting aspect that society actually sort of imposes certain restrictions upon you. Perhaps it's to do with the geographical location, possibly to do with certain kind of foods need to be eaten because you are sort of in a state of mourning, and your body needs some kind of food which is going to be comforting, which is going to give you that succor that you need at that stage. Or perhaps there are certain kind of foods, it is said, that which are not appropriate for your mental state and your physical being at that time. So it's all of this and a lot more, because even religion in India and certain kind of cultural traditions which actually dictate what people during the mourning phase should be eating. Now, when we talk about death and mourning, we're not really talking about only the day when the person passes away. It's to do with days after that. So, in certain parts of India and in certain religions, it could be 10 days, 12 days, a month. So, the mourning period really sort of varies from different parts of India, different religions, as we say. But generally, what is interesting or unique, as it is for everything else in India, there is, as we say, unity in diversity in India in everything. And so also, ironically, even in the kind of food that people eat during the mourning period, somewhere along the line actually sort of ties in, and there are a lot of common factors regarding this. I'm going to very briefly talk about food in different parts of India and in different religions, and what is avoided and what is generally eaten, and perhaps the reasons for it. One of the very important aspects of food during mourning is obviously the whole thing stems from the fact that the person who is mourning or the family who is mourning their loved one obviously is not in a state where they really want to think about food, they want to eat food, or they sort of look forward to food. It's more like you must eat to live, you must eat for sustenance, you must eat because you need to go on. So obviously, you certainly need to eat, but at the same time, as per tradition, they say that the house fires should not be burning till the cremation fires or the funeral pyre of the person is, sort of goes down. You should not really be lighting house fires for cooking. And as a result, families across India, across religions, don't really cook when somebody has passed away in their family. So it's generally, what do you need to eat, you need to survive, you need to live, and you must. So obviously, it's neighbors, extended family, people in the neighborhood community who actually sort of chip in. And that is why we say that we sort of, our support system in India is so strong in terms of it's not just your immediate family, but neighbors, people perhaps you have not acknowledged them, you didn't know they existed. But when there's such an outpouring of grief, and people are there with you when you lose a loved one, and they just actually turn up from sort of nowhere, bringing you food and anything else that you might need. And that in India is, in any case, a tradition. As it is said that you generally sort of, most of us at that point, I mean, unfortunately, all of us have some time or the other lost a loved one in our lives. And we all sort of, hate to recall those days, but we do. You don't remember anything. Everything is sort of a haze. You're just sort of living for the sake of it. You don't know what's going on around you. But you may not remember what you ate, but you certainly remember the people who were around you. And the gifting of food, sort of bringing food for you, is what actually is very, very deeply a kind of a social bonding. You remember who it was who sort of stood by you, who sort of was there for you. And people actually, by that act of bringing food for you, are not only sort of helping you stay alive and go on with life, but there's this little gesture on their part trying to actually tell you that we care, you matter to us, and we are there for you. Standing in this hour of grief, we are there with you. The common things that in terms of food, very typical things which are generally avoided by people across India. Of course, I'm not speaking of literally every part of India, but whatever I have knowledge of, is basically things like, generally sattvic food is eaten, because at least among the Hindus, it is believed that obviously the departed soul would attain moksha if you are eating sattvic food. And you are sort of, people who are sort of mourning for their loved ones are considered sort of impure at that point in time, because you are part of that family where somebody has gone away and those rituals are still going on. So generally people want to purify their souls and their homes by eating only pure vegetarian food. Apart from pure vegetarian food, you need to be, generally, tradition dictates that you don't eat any onion, you don't eat any garlic, and basically nothing which is tamasic in nature, because that, they say, in some way kind of arouses carnal energies. So generally people stay away from that. And simple food, basically, from apart from the sattvic aspect, another thing to be kept in mind is easy digestion at that point in time. While you are mourning, you certainly need to eat, you certainly need to keep going, but you can't really eat food which is heavy, because your whole metabolism, your digestion, your state of mind, you totally, your immune system is compromised, you are completely stressed at that time, extremely emotionally vulnerable. So obviously the food that you need to eat is light, something that you can digest easily, but at the same time something that gives you energy. So typically across India, food that is commonly eaten is rice, different kinds of dal, obviously, a lot of potatoes, because as all of us know, being carbs, they give us a lot of energy. And it's something that you sort of just put in your mouth and it keeps you going. So dals could be various kind of dals, but of course, it's kind of very basic food. Some people, some communities have a kind of a dal soup. For example, the Bori Muslims, they generally have a kind of a, you eat a sort of rice, and along with that you eat a cold soup, which is actually the moong ka
So,
water or the moong ka pani, and
mm,
just tempered with a bit of spice and peanuts,
mm,
and you just sort of have that, and a light curry is what is there. There are others who actually eat moong, which is considered to be very light, very cooling for the system, and that is what they eat. So typically, be it people from Bengal who are eating a sort of a moong dal and rice with sheddo aloo, as we call it, or perhaps you're eating some other kind of boiled potatoes. So these are typically things which sort of give you sustenance, and which is what typically people tend to eat. The Assamese again eat moong which has been fermented and which has been soaked for a long time, and maw prasad is what they call it, along with chickpeas. So these are typical combinations of dal, rice, is generally the common kind of food. And then, of course, there are different intricacies which certain religions or certain parts of India follow. For instance, the Bori Muslims, again, the day somebody passes away, they actually eat bread dipped in milk. Then from the third or the fourth day, the diets change. Leading on to the 11th day, 12th day, depending upon the period for which you're mourning, and basically, like as we call it, a Shrad or the Tervi, or different nomenclature really, but it essentially across India, it really pretty much means the same thing. And then it kind of leads to the day when actually, in some communities or some parts of India, we celebrate the departed soul, and you actually cook food which the loved one who has gone away used to enjoy eating. And it's actually a feast which, to an onlooker who's not aware, might be that, oh, how can people mourning be eating this kind of food? But they're actually celebrating the departed soul. And then, of course, rituals also include, the passage of when we say that the departed soul transitions from being a ghost to a ancestor. And that's when the the balls of fish and rice, or the pindas as we call it, are sort of prepared, kept aside outside for the crow, who we believe is our ancestor or the departed soul, comes and actually sort of has that. And that's when we sort of feel that the entire process is kind of complete. Carbs, generally, carbohydrates, of course, giving us high energy, are foods which are kind of a must inclusion. And at that point, one is not really looking at, is it healthy? Is it not too much of carbs and all that? Obviously not. Survival, sustenance is actually primary for the family of the, departed soul. And that is what they are kind of primarily eating. And there are, of course, as I said, certain foods which every community avoids. And, it's a lot of rituals, lot of stress, lot of things that people are sort of involved in at that point. And so it's kind of, these sort of traditions have been prevalent. And of course, in Bengal, again, there were Bengal, Assam, Bhavisho, food, as they call it,
Yeah.
is, food that actually starts from the third or the fourth day. And similarly,
Yeah.
interestingly, even in the Parsis, it's basically after the third or the fourth day that they start eating certain foods. And contrary to popular belief, mutton dhan sak is what is kind of allowed, after the day, because you're actually, celebrating what the departed soul sort of eat. And you bring in family and friends for a meal, and it could be mutton kebabs, it could be mutton dhan sak, and you're actually sort of, paying a tribute to the departed soul. So different communities have different kind of food, but primarily, or interestingly, there are a lot of commonalities. I don't think I will sort of delve any further at this point, because I would love to hear the other speakers. And then, of course, I'm there to answer any questions, anything, and sort of engage in discussion with the other speakers. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. That was quite rich and a wonderful take on the topic of today's discussion. So, moving on, I would now like to hand it over to Ms. Radhakrishna to present her perspectives on the topic in discussion today. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay, first, thank you very much for inviting me to join this wonderful panel of speakers and food writers and so on, and being with you. So it is a great privilege, and I'm very happy to address you all today. Um, I have to keep in mind that we've been allotted only 10 minutes to make our presentation. And actually, there are parallels in every community, in everything that we say. So I will skirt around a lot of things which Minnie said also applied to what I was going to say, but I'll try to give it a different perspective and talk about different things which she has not covered. That was a wonderful talk, Minnie, and I would love to hear more from you sometime when we get to know each other better. As she said, when a person dies, the kitchen is closed, the puja room is closed, no fire is lit, and no cooking is done till the cremation or the burial is over. And it is usually in our community, it is the samandi, that is the parents of your son or parents-in-law of your son and daughter who come and serve the food. And in their absence, or if they don't exist or don't live in the same city, It is friends and relatives who flock together to come and offer succor to the grieving people and so on. And as we all know, till the cremation is over, there are so many mourners there. So nowadays, a lot of customs have been, cut short, and everyone needs food. I mean, everyone needs at least tea or coffee or some kind of refreshments, which always seems to be there, in flasks. Sometimes we don't even know who brings it to you, but it's there. And generally, the person, the next of kin, if you've lost your husband, the wife is forced to eat some kind of food just to keep her energy flowing, and she's depleted totally. And this is something that can't be helped. And again, there are foods which give you sustenance, as Minnie said. There are foods which act as coolants. Moong dal is supposed to be one of them, and your carbs are required for further energy and so on. And salt is generally not added, in the sense, even if it's not completely eliminated, they serve with half salt during the 13 days of the mourning period, which ends during the day of purification. Because it says that salt absorbs spiritual energy, which deflects the passage of the soul to its destined destination. And we people, our community, are the non-Brahmin Tamil community in the south, and we are non-vegetarians. We are used to eating non-vegetarian food, even if it's not every day. We are used to it. But during this period, we shun non-vegetarian food. We don't eat them. Eat any no fish, chicken, mutton, anything. And even this is supposed to be a kind of it's supposed to be helpful to the soul, because the eating of flesh is again bad for the departed soul. The 13th day ceremony is called the Karmandram, and the day before that is called the Nadappu. And what we do is, every meal that we eat for those 13 days, some of it is offered to the person, in the sense the photograph is there beside a lighted lamp, and we place, say, we start with breakfast items like idlis, dosas, or whatever you plan for the family are kept there. Puja is done, camphor is lit, and agarbatti is lit, and we prostrate before the photograph, and keep a glass of water is always must, and then only do we partake of the food. And similarly, it is for lunch. And during the evening, just after sundown, that will be the last offering for the day. You serve light tiffin, something very light, but the water is changed every day, because it is believed that the spirit comes and sips the water. And some people even believe that the placing of the food is also shifted, which shows that they have come there and eaten, and that gives a lot of pleasure. So on the day prior to the Karmandram ceremony, we call it the Nadappu. The Nadappu ceremony is quite a grand one, in the sense everyone who has missed the funeral, or who haven't had the time to come and visit the bereaved people, come on that day to condole. And they bring a lot of sweets. It could be laddus, it could be murkus, it could be any kind of snacks which they fancy. And it's all served along with fruit and flowers, and again placed before the photograph for people to see what they brought. And we have this custom of people deciding which day to bring what. Now, supposing the father has died, each day a child takes a turn to to place this uh, on the evening, in the evening, before the photograph, or sometimes it's a joint effort where all of them combine and place all these things. And finally, you are left with so much of eats. So what happens is, for the Nadappu day, usually all these snacks are put into packets, and distributed to the people visitors who come just before they leave. And they are also served a grand tiffin, and they are supposed to think of the person who has left them and eat them. And another common uh, custom is every day when you cook food, I mean, I'm talking about the immediate family, they always make the kind of food that the person liked. Like now, my father, on puja days, the standard menu was vegetable sambar, potato fry, and vades, and one other vegetable dish. And that's what we made for him. Not every day, but we would vary it each day because we feel that he is somewhere around and he definitely will appreciate that. And during the 13th day ceremony, it is called the Karmandram. Not that many people come because they say it's not necessary to come there and feast. So a fixed number of people come, and the ceremony is conducted in the morning with the priest, Brahmin priest, who purifies the whole house. He sanctifies it by sprinkling of water, and the person who has lighted the funeral pyre, that person, usually the son of the house, he doesn't shave for those 13 days. On that day, he shaves his head, he shaves his beard off and everything, and wears only a very thin dhoti. And with that, he is also purified and allowed to leave the house because till then, he's not supposed to leave the house. Um, so after this, they have this distribution of pinda prasadam, as we call it. And one of the main ingredients is again moong dal. Somehow it features a lot in funeral foods. A ball is made with the rice and other delicacies offered. And first, the crows are fed, either in the top story in the terrace or in the balcony. And when the crows come and eat the food, they say that they've assumed a different form and they've come there and they go away satisfied. Um, there are again many people who eat non vegetarian food from the next day onwards. Like, for instance, the Konkani Muslims eat dry fish with rice and roti. And this happens in the villages as they can't really go out and buy fresh fish. Then some of the Hyderabadi Muslims, they bring food since food has not been cooked in the house, morning house. They bring food and they bring something like biryani, they bring kebabs, and they bring halim and serve it to people. I mean, it all varies from place to place. And we also have another custom. Since once the Karmandram is over and the purification is done, the immediate members of the family gather together for a good non vegetarian feast. And that marks the end of the mourning period where we rejoice that the person has lived his life and he is gone according to the call of God and he's left. And that releases him or her from all bondage and he goes away to his destination, never to come back to the earth. So, this is again, as I told you, every community has their own rules. Like the Catholics also don't eat meat, but the East Indian Catholics of Mumbai eat prawns with dudi or bottle gourd, and so on. Uh, then I thought I'll quote something which I found very interesting in the course of my research. There was a gentleman called Alan Davidson, and he published the plans for his funeral when he was just 64 years old. He was a British writer, food writer, and a former diplomat. And he was best known for editing the encyclopedic Oxford Companion to Food. He wanted to give his souvenir to all the friends who attended the funeral. And he wrote a small cookbook full of his favorite recipes. So, what better stick could one have uh, better than this? I mean, it was something to be treasured. And it was a small little journal, maybe about 25 recipes, but people really loved them. And when he passed away at the age of 79, they called it his funeral memory book. So these are things that even I think of, and I keep saying how nice it would be to pass on something like this to our children. Uh, So all said and done, we make the foods according to the dictates of society, and some widows are not given garlic or not given onions because, as Minnie pointed out, it raises all kinds of desires in them which shouldn't be. At that time it was considered that, but these days all these customs are bypassed and people do what they like. uh, Many communities celebrate the death of a person with joy, and there's a lot of feasting, more feasting than fasting. But the underlying dictate should be that food should be light on the stomach and easy to digest, and nothing very heavy which will cause further illness apart from the sorrow that the immediate family is facing. So sometimes you think that death binds people. Life binds people like the birth of a child sometimes brings in a bond. But in death, I think the bond is even more because whatever antagonism, whatever enmity people might have with each other, they say you can miss a wedding, but you cannot miss a funeral. So people are there to show their, feeling for the person bereaved, and everything else is forgotten, especially in the show of food that they bring. So I don't want to take up more time because I don't want to overstep the 10 minutes given. And we will talk more as questions are asked. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am, for that very persuasive talk. I would now like to move on to Miss Awal to hear her perspectives on the topic of today's discussion. Miss Awal, the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much. Firstly, I'm honored to be a part of this panel with Minnie ma'am and Sabita ma'am. Uh, I think I'm way too inexperienced compared to them when it comes to journalism and writing, but very happy to share my perspective on this particular topic. Uh, I wouldn't be taking too much time in terms of divulging into the foods that we eat, because I would in fact recommend that everyone should go and read Minnie Ma'am's article in the Goa Journal, which is a beautifully detailed article where she talks about how different communities mourn and the foods that we eat. What I am going to talk about though is how food is actually something which we cannot separate from any point of our life, any mourning period or celebrations for that matter. So, food cannot be separated with certainty from any event in life, and the same applies to grief and death. So, this is around last year when I worked on an article around this time of the year, last year, where I spoke about the relation between food and grief and how food basically helps us to cope up with grief. Collectively, we were all going through so much as a country at that point of time. And I wanted to talk about from the perspective of a person who is in the food industry, who's a food writer, that how the same food, which in a way is, something that gives comfort to us, can also be something which, it reminds us of someone we've lost, and how it takes away, the memories of food, that the food that you eat can become jarring, they can become triggers as well. So one of the thing to note is that we all as humans share a very odd relation with grief, stress and food. A lot of us, it's said that when a trauma hits you, the first thing to be impacted is your stomach. So either you will start consuming more food because it gives you comfort, or you will stay, completely stay away from it. So a lot of us would lose our appetite, and while some of us would actually indulge and find comfort in that food. uh, as my earlier two speakers, my co-panelists mentioned, one of the most important things around the world, but let's talk about India here, which is most common when it comes to death, is that people come together, the community comes together when there is a death in someone's house. I'm sorry, I'm able to hear a lot of noise. Is it just me?
Mm,
There's a lot of background buzzing. It's not coming from my end.
no, I don't hear any such noise.
Okay, all right. So I'm just going to continue.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So the thing
please.
with the thing is that the community comes together when there is a death in a family. I come from Punjab, and one of the most significant part of the Punjabi culture is the mohalla culture, which is very much a part of Delhi and the whole belt of North India, Punjab, UP, Uttarakhand. All of these are places where the mohalla culture is very strong. So as they mentioned earlier, when there's a death in the house, no fire is lit in the house for 13 days, of the mourning period. This is when the community comes together. Your food, your chai, your coffee, your breakfast, lunch, dinner, everything is taken care of, by the people, your distant relatives, your immediate relatives, and your family and friends who are near you. I think last year as a community, we lost, the whole idea of grieving collectively. And that's something which the pandemic gave us, that we cannot grieve collectively anymore. If there was a death, which unfortunately were in plenty last year, we couldn't be there with the people to take care of them. So the option of cooking, not cooking, taking care of your basic needs was suddenly taken away. As a direct family, where you were not even given the chance to say bid adieu to your loved ones, you now also had to take care of your basic nourishment. So this is something which the pandemic gave us, that it took away from us the feeling of collectively grieving and mourning someone who we've lost. I spoke to a psychologist and a psychiatrist, two separate people last year, about this, and how they actually are helping people who are coming to them in terms of helping them cope up with the grief that comes with the death of someone. And they mentioned a very peculiar point, that how, when it comes to dealing with grief and giving helping them with therapy, one of the most important things which they had to do now was also rebuild the relationship a person shared with food. Because food, though a part, something which will give you comfort, can also be something which is a trigger, like I mentioned earlier. So say a simple cup of chai in the morning might just remind you of someone you shared that cup of tea with. A simple dal chawal, it reminds you of the person you've lost. So how food can become trigger. So initially the process, because as time passes, obviously our ability to process grief gets better. But in the meantime, they mentioned that how, when rebuilding food with relation with food, she has to now introduce food in from the very basic level. So for instance, mashed food, khichdi, um, porridge, or and like Mini Ma'am mentioned earlier, the simple dal, rice, boiled food, your boiled potatoes. So your nutrition is coming in, and at the same time, these are food which is otherwise what you would feed a baby. So your relationship with food is rebuilt all over again, just so that you are able to move on with time. And as of course you move on, uh, you're able to process your grief better, they start to reintroduce other dishes which you were fond of. So these are things which I felt that like we spoke about the moong dal being a very common thing. So when I agreed to do this panel, I spoke to a lot of friends and family, and friends from other communities, about food that they make at their homes. And what I found common in all of this was the moong dal, as mentioned. Be it any religion, be it any community from different parts of India, moong dal and rice actually found a very common place there. Moong dal, as you know, is a coolant, so it helps to calm your heat in the body down. So when you're mourning, there's obviously different kind of emotions that you're going through. So moong dal is actually something which really helps to calm you down. And salt, when it comes to, say, salt, when it comes to turmeric, like Sabita ma'am mentioned about salt, why we do not eat salt. Similarly, if you come to think about it, when it comes to turmeric, a lot of families also abstain from using turmeric. The reason being that, there should be no color in your food, there should be no vibrancy attached to it. Let's not forget that when it comes to food, it's also considered something which is like a luxurious indulgence, and indulgences are looked down at when you are grieving. So your salt, turmeric, these are things which are usually missing in your food for that particular period of time.
True.
Um, Also, of course, we spoke about vegetarianism. So, sattvic food, again, no heat in the body is to be generated more out of the fact. I'm guessing that it's to do with the fact that, to keep your body cooled down. But this is something that you will see that these are things which were imposed on widows. So, it's unfortunately something which is so deep rooted in our society in terms of patriarchy, where someone else dictates what is acceptable for you to wear, to eat, and how you should mourn, and how you should even live your life moving on. um, I'm sure a lot of you know about the customs which the widows have to follow, especially in Bengal. It's given birth to a repertoire of beautiful dishes actually, which come from the widow food. It finds its roots in that. So someone dictating what to eat, what not to eat, these are something which are rooted in our society in terms of the patriarchy that has always been there. But uh, I mean, when it comes to vegetarianism, I don't suppose, I mean, I don't believe it should be something that, should be forced on someone. But at the same time, the whole idea back then used to be that, garlic, for instance, someone mentioned, garlic is something which is going to give heat in your body, is going to get heat into your body, which is going to give birth to, desires, which is what a widow was supposed to abstain from. So, I really hope we are moving on from that. And I think that would be it from me. I'm sorry, I'm not as organized in my thoughts. I'm sharing with you as things come to me. But yeah, what I want to leave you with is, the way we all deal with our grief when it comes to food, and how, at the end of the day, if you come to think about it, it is food that becomes this vessel, which perseveres through the years, and in the end also provides us comfort, in terms of remembering someone we lost. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. It was indeed a wonderfully engaging talk. I would now move on to the question and answer segment. And my first question is for Mini Ma'am. So, your first cookbook titled Magical Twists East Meets West explores how ingredients of one cuisine can be seamlessly woven into the heart of another cuisine, leveraging the harmony in ingredients and flavors. So, can you share with us any instance where a peppy twist has been given to the otherwise unvarying food of morning to enhance its adaptability to the taste buds?
Unfortunately, Devasini, while my book is all about this twist, ingredients from Bengal, finding their way into Goan kitchen and vice versa as well. Unfortunately, where morning food is concerned, I mean, I for sure have not dared to sort of, delve into that and, sort of mess with tradition in that aspect. So honestly, I have not really done any such thing where I would, especially morning food, any other kind of food, I'm very happy to give it a kind of twist and experiment with it in my
Okay,
kitchen
okay,
and,
okay,
create a recipe, but not
okay,
morning food at the risk of, rubbing loads of people the wrong way. I wouldn't do that. And I don't think, jokes
okay.
apart, I think it would not sort of go down very well in terms of, traditions, because I think the time of mourning, as all of us have obviously unanimously agreed, is a time when, you are sort of just about keeping yourself alive going on. So I don't think anybody is really seeking some kind of, okay, swadish khana or something different, or, oh, thodi change ho jaye. Yes, today for convenience, we're all slaves of convenience. So caterers and all that has come in, which very rightly Sabita pointed out. Tea, coffee is needed, things are needed. You just can't snap your fingers and sort of have them. So for convenience, people do that. But I think peppy twist to morning food, honestly, I haven't come across. The only thing that comes to my mind, which I wouldn't really call peppy, but all I can say again from Bengal, which I think all of you are extremely well versed with, as in Brahmin families where obviously rules were very much stricter, they were sort of allowed to eat food, sort of in a clay pot. It was only kachkola, and which is raw bananas, green
Yeah.
bananas, and rice, which is what you could eat with absolutely not even a smattering of salt and absolutely no oil.
Yeah.
And but because that really gave no nourishment to the people who were grieving, they later on they started adding dals to it, pulses. And that is the only little twist that I can sort of think, in food history, that was added, if only to make food perhaps a little tastier, but a lot more nourishing and wholesome. So that is the only twist that comes to my mind, unfortunately.
Okay. Okay, so thank you, ma'am. And one more thing that I would like to ask you is that as you have
Sure.
already addressed certain culinary practices in different parts of the country in the initial part of the
Yes.
conversation, I would like to know how do these practices, rituals, promote social bonding and make food a career of empathy?
Sure. Basically, very rightly, as you said, indeed, food is, whether or not we like it, it is, at least in India, for sure, it is indeed a carrier of empathy because, as we said, and I did mention in the beginning, none of us remember at the time of, when we are grieving, that what did we eat, what was cooked, was it good, was it bad, did I eat rice, did I eat khichdi, did I eat chapati? We don't remember anything. We just know that we put something in our mouth and we are sort of going on with life. But we certainly remember the people who were around us. And as Sabita very rightly pointed, you just don't know from where, but there's always food on the table. There's from where the chai comes, from where the coffee comes, from where the biscuit comes, from where the upma comes, or whatever else comes. But there is food there all the time. So obviously, it's community, neighbors, people, extended family, strangers, anybody who lives in your building or in the vicinity who sort of brings in. It is their little way of saying, as I said earlier, that we care. You matter to us, your well being matters to us, and we are there with you. There's nothing else we can do to sort of unburden your grief or reduce it, but we're certainly there with you. And of course, they are sort of, with this little gesture, and that is where sometimes new relationships, friendships are actually forged during, these kind of, so to say, unhappy times, and not really good times, as during weddings and other happy moments, when people come and we are more busy saying usme kya pehna, usme kya diya, usme, what has that person got me, how is she dressed.
Yeah.
But during this time when we are sort of bereft and despondent and grieving, somebody who's there to just hold your hand and be there for you and provide for you and your family is something that none of us really forget. And definitely food, I would say, is a very, very important, sort of link between, human beings and, relationships, and definitely a carrier of empathy, for sure.
Okay, so thank you, thank you so much, ma'am, for that wonderful answer. I will now move on to Savita, ma'am, and my question to you is that it is indeed pitiful to see what a family incurs in the suddenness of death, and mostly out of an unstable mind, we let external interventions eat into all aspects of our life so much that cooking for the dead becomes a customary ritual of much greater importance than feeding the living. So, as the author of Annapurni, which translates to the giver of food and nourishment, what would you say in this regard?
Firstly, I wouldn't agree with you to say that we are more preoccupied about cooking for the dead rather than the alive, than the people who are living. Because you look after the living, it's a tribute to the dead. It's like paying a tribute. So that amount of preoccupation with cooking funeral food or whatever is only during the morning period. It's not that we forget them altogether. It's not that. But we are preoccupied in feeding the living because life has to go on. And here I just want to say something personal, though it's difficult for me to say. We lost our daughter of 34 years. She died very suddenly. And she loved food. She was a foodie. And I didn't enter the kitchen for 1.5 years till Hindu called me and said, "We miss your writing. Please get back. Don't do this." So I started going into the kitchen when my grandchildren, her daughters, aged 6 and 2, said, "Amama, please cook food and please make the food our Amma used to make for us." That made me enter the kitchen. And I didn't think of it as funeral food or anything because I found that when I cooked that food, it was therapeutic for me. And even today, if I enter the kitchen, it works as a therapy for me. And another thing I did, which I'm sure is there in all communities, we have this habit of mixing up the rice and the curry and the things like that, vegetable. And then three, four children of our family sit together and we make them into balls and they're like little birds opening their mouth. We feed them. And every time I put one ball of rice into my granddaughter's mouth, I said, "Deepa, I'm doing this for you. I love doing this for them." It brought back all her memories. And I made the food that she learned from me and she cooked for them. Of course, the younger child was very small. She didn't know. She was just 2 years old. But the older child recalled it. She said, "This is just how Amma used to make it." So this was a preoccupation for me for the living, for her children who needed to live, who needed to not just subsist on memories, but to delight in what was available then, and that I am perpetuating this and giving them the food that they love. So even today, there are some dishes which are Deepa dishes, and we just cannot. I mean, she exists in all of us. It is difficult, but we make those dishes, and I always make the children eat those dishes, and they enjoy them. So this preoccupation, as you say, is a kind of mix. You cannot say it is a preoccupation of making food for the dead. It isn't. You make it for the living in memory of the dead. That's what I have to say.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for that answer. I will now move on to Miss Awal. So, ma'am, you were talking about widows. So, this is what I have to ask you. That you talked about imposing vegetarianism on widows and dictating their food choices to the extent of affecting their metabolic conditioning. So, I would like to ask you if food should it all be considered a fertile ground that breeds societal expectations and degrades one's individual identity and well being in the long run.
Absolutely not. Food needs to be comforting. Food is something which brings the community together. So I don't completely agree with how it should be a breeding ground where it becomes something where someone is dictating to you what you can or what you cannot eat. The thing with vegetarianism in our country is that it's linked with purity. And the moment someone else dictates to you what purity is, in terms of what you're consuming, uh, that is taking away something so basic from you about how you should be deciding what is right for you. It's when it comes to food, like I mentioned in my talk, it's all about comfort. It's like what ma'am spoke about right now. Food is also about reliving memories, keeping your people alive through the food that you consume. So no, it absolutely should not be something that should be dictated to someone about what they should eat, what they should not eat. See, you're also, the moment you're taking away from someone the right to what they can consume, you're also changing fundamentally what they've grown up with. and that decision at the end of the day has to be gradual. If it ever has to be, it cannot be so sudden. So no one else should have that right to dictate to you. And no, food needs to be about bringing people together, not about discriminating.
Uh, Vernika ma'am, if you could also throw light on some of the forgotten delicacies of Taj, and which you think can be revived and brought to the fore to keep up with the strong sense of history.
So I wouldn't call them delicacies per se, because, like we mentioned earlier, like my panelists mentioned earlier, the last thing in your mind when you're consuming that food is about, खाने में अच्छा है कि नहीं. The whole point at that time is to be nourished. And that's why I think as a society also, because the moment people come together, even if you cannot keep it in mind about what you can or cannot eat, what's good for you at that time. And by good, I don't mean the good and bad in terms of what the society expects it to be, but in terms of what's nutritionally good for you at that time. The reason when people come together and are taking care of that food, I think everything automatically falls in place. Like I said, moong dal is common in almost every single community in our country. It's being consumed in some manner or the other. It's only on the 13th day, the Shrad, or the 1 year later, when you do the what we call barsi in Punjabi. It is then that food is also celebration. It I mean, I'd like to mention that one of the most important things which my father tells me, I lost my grandparents very early. It's about how we need to remember those who've gone through what we could. So I have not really, seen my grandmother, my dadi, so much. I was just 10 when she passed away. But Deyasini, today every single food that I cook in my house is something that was passed on to my father by my dadi.
Okay.
So today, if Delectable Punjab is a project, a research-based project, which will soon be a book, it is memory of that person carrying on. And with that, you're also adding the memories. So I talk about the partition, how that impacted how my family ate. When you talk about vegetarianism, like I said, it has to be gradual. For me, my family came from Pakistan as refugees, and because my grandmother came to India as a single mother, they couldn't afford to eat that non-veg food anymore. So the family turned vegetarian, and today, till date, I'm the fourth generation. We're all vegetarians. So sometimes vegetarianism is not just about what was forced on you by someone, but also about circumstance, right? And
Yeah.
like I say, it's all about the food, it's all about the choices you make. So no, these are not delicacies, these are nourishing foods, which I think as long as we keep the spirit of our community alive, these won't be lost to history.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am, for that really wonderful answer. I have one last question, and this is for all of you. So, the question is, as we all know, that food is symbolic of universality that has the power to bring people together, irrespective of caste, creed, color, and race. It has been integral to every celebration, be it commemorating the deceased with food or even other occasions. So, do you therefore think that subsuming food under the category of mourning feeds the cultural need and intention of looking at a particular staple to be had only on selective days of grief when we can have it on other days too?
Can I say something at this point? Yeah.
Yes, sure, sure, sure.
See, rice seems to be the staple for all morning food or funeral food. Rice, which is so maligned today, where the young people will not touch rice, they look at it as if it's poison. Uh, Rice is the food that is prescribed generally for all, morning food. And I also want to say, when you talk about memories, because the second question wasn't asked, I just want to tell you that out of the 5 books I've written, 3 books are memory books. In the sense, they are dedicated to people I love, and people whose memories I want it, to go on forever. For instance, my first book, Aharam, I wrote when I had no idea what a cookbook should read like. I just wrote it because I thought my mother's cooking was fabulous, and since she lived with us, all her recipes are there, both in Aharam and Annapurni. So, when I wrote it, it was kind of a celebration because my children and their children are going to have this book, treasure it, because it was their grandmother's recipes, and I standardized it. I took ownership, shamelessly, because I worked on them. But that is the kind of thing that we should do for our parents and for our grandparents. Not to just sit and mourn, because the mourning period is there. But as I said, life has to go on. And what more precious thing can we have than a documentation of the kind of food they cooked, the era in which they lived? That is a tribute you pay to the dead. Yeah.
Thank you, Sabita ma'am. Mini ma'am, do you have anything to add to this?
Yes, I totally agree with what Savita said. Absolutely. Food, obviously, in a way, there's a connective aspect to food. So, obviously, food, the person has gone away. Yes, there's a gaping hole in your heart. You're going to miss them forever. That's a very personal, feeling. But as she said, you remember them, you celebrate them. And obviously, it's like it could be, oh, this dish, oh, we used to have it together. Oh, this place we used to go together. Early in the morning, this person used to like their eggs this way, or a poha this way, or an upma. So these are constant memories, and as she said, if these are documented, if you continue to make them, rather than, yes, the immediate trigger sometimes post losing a person is that, oh, I want to shun everything that person did, or we ate, or we sort of cooked, because it reminds me of them. It's a trigger, which Varnika very rightly said. But at the same time, food is restorative. Food is, it has a connective aspect. So as with the passage of time, when I won't say that our grief reduces, but we learn, all of us, come up with a mechanism to cope with that grief, and, sort of learn to live with it. You actually then tend to document those recipes or cook that food and remember that person, and it actually brings a smile to your lips. Today, I mean, obviously my parents are no more, but the things that my mother cooked, or the dishes that my father enjoyed, each time I make them, it's like it sort of makes you remember them, celebrate them, and I feel as if it's their presence around. Oh, okay, I've made kheer. I remember my mother. Oh, this is how she used to make it. Oh, she would have told me little more elaichi, less of this. Sort of doodh kaur kado and this and that. So these are things. So they actually turn into something which actually give you solace, and they sort of stay with you forever. So yes, even I would not like to call them morning food, for want of a better word. I'd rather call them food which we would sort of cherish their memories, rather than calling it morning food. It's a very bleak, mundane, morbid kind of a term, which I would not really like to use.
Thank you so much, Mini ma'am. Vernika ma'am, would you like to say anything in this regard?
I completely agree with Savita ma'am and Mini ma'am. Like life is continuous, grief also is something which we live with, to be very honest, as long as we are alive. We don't forget the people who leave us, we just find different ways of celebrating them. So, yeah, I wouldn't call it food of grief, I'd say food of solace, food of celebration. At the end of the day, it's all about how how you tend to keep those memories alive. Today, while eating something, while you might just be shedding tears while eating that thing, tomorrow you might just be smiling while doing the same. So it's all about how you plan to go on. And like I said, I mean, with time, we all know it does get better. You don't forget the people. Love doesn't stop just because someone's gone. You convert your love in different ways, and you commemorate your relationships accordingly. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Varnika ma'am. What a brilliant way to end the session on. And I would like to thank each one of you for being with us today and share your valuable wisdom for our project. This is to state that we are seeking submissions in the form of stories, poems, and essays as part of our project. To know more, please visit our website www.tellmeyourstory.biz, and we are coming up with a series of academic discussions to be live streamed on our page. Stay tuned, and wishing all of you a very good night. Stay safe, eat well. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Deyasini. Thank you.